Hello. So I just made the second part of this video. It was 40 minutes long. So then I thought I'm going to try and make one under 20 minutes. And I got to about 13 minutes and my battery died. So I got a new battery in here. And I'm going to start over on this one. So here's the park. In the previous video, we talked about the housing situation, some of the housing projects that are already planned, some of them that we're not sure what's going on, but the land has been sold, and about why that isn't the best use of this space. Housing, this isn't going to house a lot of people, and we have a lot of housing coming up. It looks like the Prescott area is going to increase its number of houses by 20-ish%. It's a massive increase. And I don't know if we actually even have the jobs to support that big of an increase. So we'll have to see what happens there. So I'm going to look at the park situation. I mentioned some of the things that were in this design already. People want to be able to walk across. So we've got from there to there and here to here. They can come and they can go. And they can cut through reasonably quickly. It's not as straight as if you went straight through, but it's just a little bit of a meandering trail to slow people down just that little bit. And then I mentioned that we have 6 separate areas for hanging out. We've got this covered structure in the middle. That's the initial shade. That's the first shade that we'll have because everything else is going to have to grow. And this is right on the path, so we can have some picnic benches in here or something like that, where people with walkers or wheelchairs or whatever, it's accessible to everyone. And then right off of that, we've got this next spot that is also accessible to everyone. I'm trying to see through the paper to see where I'm pointing. So we've got this spot here that everyone can come into, but then it's lined with flowers, and I did that on purpose because I wanted a beautiful backdrop for photos. So if we have people who are maybe having a wedding, or we have a bunch of benches in here and people having a family gathering or something, this would be a great spot for people to stop and take some photos. And then I thought I'd already drawn this tree in and this tree in, these 2 little trees, but I thought, well, if they weren't there, then this third section here, which is the large closed canopy, so you've got really big trees where the tops of the trees touch, so you've got this nice dappled shade everywhere where it's nice and cool, but that, the trunks are really far apart. This is, that's almost half the distance of the park between those 2 trunks. So there's still room for soccer games, but there's also, if we remove these trees, maybe just leave some bushes in here with an opening, there's also room for a bunch of benches and seats, so someone can have a wedding here. And we can look at that. We can use this as a very beautiful wedding venue. And then maybe these picnic tables in here are where they serve their potluck lunch that they're having. A nice low budget, low key community wedding. So that's 1, 2, 3 areas. 4 and 5 are big trellises. Nice big, probably big 6x6 timber frame trellis. That's the type of stuff that I like to build, and I can teach people in the community to build it, and then we can do a workshop and we can build it together. And if some people pay, an enrollment fee for the class, that'll cover all the materials. This one's covered in grapes. This one's covered in hardy kiwis, which are like a grape-sized hairless kiwi that grows in this area. A nice treat, something a little bit different. And these will provide shade, but the leaves of all of the plants in here, but especially in these trellises, are going to be evaporating moisture. And then we get something called evaporative cooling, where it's actually going to cool the air in here. It's not just going to be cooler because it's shaded, it's actually going to be a cooler space than the rest of the area around the park in the middle of summer. So it'll be a really nice retreat. And underneath one of these, maybe we can stick some nice wide, those big wooden porch swings or something like that. Something where people can just be invited to stay and hang out. Or maybe one of them becomes a place where someone starts teaching yoga in the park. Lots of different options. That's something that's accessible all the way from kids up to seniors. And also gives an opportunity for another local business to start, which is something that we're trying to encourage in town. And then the last one was this one down here, this little triangle space with a gate right there. And
This one, you know, the gate has a little bell on it, ding ding, when you go through, kind of like you're going into a store. And what that allows is, you know, mama and her babies or dad and the babies go into the library, they grab some books, they come out, or toddlers, and they sit down, they close the gate behind them, ding ding, they sit down, they lay their blankets down, whatever, they grab some berries on the way in, some grapes, and they start reading them their story. And as they're reading the story to the two kids, one kid gets up and wanders off. But you're not worried, because as long as you don't hear that ding ding, you know, you look over and you see, yeah, they're just stuffing their face with blueberries. That's fine. They've got blueberries all over their face or whatever. You hear them giggling and having fun over there. Maybe they're chasing a butterfly around. But as long as you don't hear that ding, you've got that kind of peace of mind. You know that, one, your kid hasn't gone anywhere, but two, that no one else has come in. So your kid is safe. And it just is nice to be able to have a little bit of that safety in a public space. Also a space where I would happily go on a Sunday afternoon and take a nap. But realistically, if I was taking a nap, I would probably stick a hammock up between these two trees here, or somewhere on one of these posts over here, because they're a nice shady spot, and I prefer a hammock. So then we took a look at that's how we got the separate areas and how I got the paths. I curved the paths, and I used I've got these kind of architectural curve shapes so that I can take a look, and I tried to find curves where you cannot see from here. This side means you cannot see the road. From here, you cannot see the road. It curves just enough. From all these spaces, you can't quite see out. So everywhere you look is nature. And that meets one of the other needs that we mentioned, that we saw, which was that people want areas that feel like nature areas. So with all these different trees, all these different flowers, all these different herbs, all these different vines, and all the bird life and butterfly life and all the insect life, everything else that's going around with this, you're going to end up with this nature haven. In that, when we were looking at our map, that little white speck in the middle, that's this park, that's going to become this beautiful kind of ecological retreat. So then how did I design, how did I pick what trees are going here? They're not labeled there. I've got the general pattern in my mind, and I've got a list of plants that those can be. But how did I pick them? Why are there bushes there and this size tree? Well, it's because if we were to leave this property alone, stop mowing it, stop taking care of it, what's going to happen is over time it's going to become a forest. There'll be some quick trees that come up, and those provide shade for the slow growing, the maples and the oaks and the walnuts and all of those trees, which will eventually come up and take over and create a forest there. So we know that forests want to thrive. So we take a look at the elements of a forest. What makes a forest work? We don't go into the forest to take care of the forest. I mean, sometimes we do, and sometimes we mess it up. Sometimes we make it a whole lot better. And we can work with a forest to make it better, but we don't have to touch a forest for it to remain good. So why does it do that? It's because we don't have this plant, and they're separate things. This has a relationship with this. But though this one also has a relationship with this, which has a relationship with this, and there's all these little connections between everything, creating this kind of web. And this is what we learn about in school. We learn about all the interactions. We don't learn about it in this detail, but we do learn about it. So then, how do we replicate this? Well, when you go into a forest, you have big tall trees. There's a big tall tree. And then you have some smaller trees around it. This one's still a 25 or 30 foot tree, but it's a smaller tree. But these are really the smaller trees around. These are kind of the apple trees and the pear trees and the plum trees that we like to grow. And then beneath those we have bushes. Well, look at all these little circles. Those are bushes. Those can be anything from I always forget the word for some reason, even though I have over 100 of them growing in my backyard. The rhubarb. So all the way from rhubarb up to some flowering bushes to a 4 or 5 foot high
berry bush, some gooseberries, currants, some haskcaps, raspberries, black raspberries, probably not actual blackberries because they like to grow really, really big and they like to spread, and that doesn't really fit into this context. But as we look, we're replicating the forest. There's all these layers of the forest, and then eventually you get down. So we have our big trees, our smaller trees, our bushes. Then we get to these herbaceous things, these flowers, these plants. So we're going to have herbs that come back year after year. We're going to have there's some spinaches and some kales and some broccolis that actually grow back year after year. We're going to plant some of those in there. There's an artichoke that comes back year after year, so we'll plant those in there. And this is getting some vegetables in with all of our fruits that I was mentioning. And so some herbs that'll be producing flowers. Those would be great for beauty, great for pollinators. They're going to be producing the actual herbs that we can pick and we can use in our food, we can use in our medicine. We can use, cut some of them and use them in a bouquet. There's lots of uses for it. Below that, then we have ground cover. Nature doesn't really like to have bare soil too much. So the ground cover can be things like strawberries. So we have strawberries on the ground, and then we have maybe some broadleaf plantain, which a lot of us think of as a weed. It is one of the best things to put on a bee sting or a bug bite, or if you get stinging nettle, any of those things. It's one of it's amazing. I love it. Do your research. I'm a doctor. Legal things, insert here, yada yada. Great. So we can plant those things. And by creating all these layers, you have spaces for the different sizes of, different types of beetles to hang out in. The birds have cover as they're flying around looking for the bugs and looking for berries to enjoy. And as they're going around doing a lot of our pest control. So instead of having to spray for pests, we've got these birds flying around. And instead of a pest landing on this tree because, they come in and there's just 100 apple trees all together, well, they come in and this one's an apple tree. So, this one's an apple tree, right? But this one's a pear tree. This one's a plum tree. And, maybe this one's an elderberry. So the pest that's on here, it likes apples. It doesn't like plums or cherries or apple, whatever else I mentioned in there. It likes apples. Well, this one over here is another apple, but it's a different type of apple, and it's resistant to that type of bug. So this one tries searching, it doesn't find it. It doesn't find anywhere to go. So it's stuck on this place. And then all the birds that are flying around, they start to notice, oh, that's our food. They're right there. And they start to pick off all of those pests that are there. It limits the spread of the pests, it limits the spread of disease, and it allows the nature to deal with it on its own. So that's why we're not going to have a bunch of apple trees, a bunch of pear trees. We're going to have everything mixed in together. It's going to be a nice kind of beautiful fruit basket of plants. And there are a few places where I did one type of plant. So for example, here it's one specific type of grape. Two reasons for that. One, it's because that type of grape grows really well without pruning. It'll cover this, it'll create a beautiful shade structure, it'll continue to produce, that's onto the second reason, that it'll continue to produce heavily even without pruning. So it makes it a perfect character to place in that situation. This one with the kiwi will take over. If we planted grapes and kiwis here, the kiwi would want to take over the whole structure anyways. So it kind of makes sense just to let the kiwi be on its own on that structure. Again, it'll provide shade. We are going to have mostly female kiwi vines and a few males because that's a type of plant that requires male and female plants to pollinate. So we're going to have a little bit of both in there. Quick note, I did see that at least, I think it was Walmart, maybe it was Canadian Tire, but I'm pretty sure it was Walmart was selling hardy kiwi vines last year. They did not list if they were male or female, at least on the ones that I looked at. So you may run into issues there. Hopefully they're female,
but you'll still need a male to pollinate them. So we're going to incorporate both of them into here, so that way we get all our pollination. So that's another kind of monoculture, but it's a very small, these are small sections. Another one is these grapes along this walkway. So this is all grapes, but they're going to be a bunch of different types of table grapes. So these are all the grapes that you'd buy at, at the grocery store, things like that, where you're just going to enjoy them. But we'll mix them up. They're not going to be all the same. There might be a few of one in a row and a few of another in a row, but we're not going to have 5,000 of one type of grape. The fourth place where I have one type of plant is the hazelnuts. So there's hazelnuts growing here, and I selected hazelnuts because they're a really good source of fat, a really healthy source of fat. And if we can get a bunch of different types of fruits and some hazelnuts to the food bank, first off, that's going to be the most posh food bank that anyone has ever seen, but it's going to provide healthy food. And typically, most of the people that I know of that are going to the food bank, they're not able to buy healthy food elsewhere. Their health, because they're eating junk, garbage food that gets what gets donated, continues either to decline or to stay where it is. And if some of them have access to good food, and I've seen it where they got access to good food and their health got better, then they could start working again. And then they didn't have to take from the food bank. And they could even start donating to the food bank. So we're going to start giving people healthy food, healthy fats, through hazelnuts. But they are wind pollinated. They need to be together. And I planted them going east-west because that's the way our prevailing wind goes east-west. And so then the wind's going to blow across these, and they're all going to get pollinated. The last one that I planted kind of in a monoculture was the very southern row. They're pawpaws. The reason I selected that type of tree is because they have a taproot, so they're not going to damage the building if they're planted close to the building. And two is that they like to grow in the shade. They don't produce as heavily in the shade, but they do need shade for the first few years in order to survive. So that's kind of an ideal spot to use up for them, because we can stick them there, we can stick a couple other things, but they're also naturally pest resistant. I'm probably going to include some pawpaws elsewhere in here. For just a quick note, they are a very tropical tasting fruit and tropical looking fruit that's actually native to Ontario. As the GTA spread, it pretty much wiped them out in Ontario, but there's a number of us that are bringing them back. It's like a mango, pineapple, custard cross, delicious thing. So I did put a bunch of them there, but they are very pest resistant as well, and they're very disease resistant. There's not much that affects them, so they're not at risk with having too many of them in a row. And then in the middle, I specifically chose the flowering things because I wanted it to be beautiful, but I choose flowers that also have other uses. So there's lilacs. You can pick the flowers from lilacs, put them into a simple syrup, and then strain it out, and you have a drink that tastes the way that lilacs smell. And it doesn't keep really well in the fridge, only for a week or two, but you can freeze some, then you can pull out in ice cubes, you can pull out one of those in the dead of winter, like right now, and have this beautiful taste of summer. And then there's elderberries, and I didn't write that on there, but some of them is going to be elderberries. So elderberries are an edible crop that you can cook into pies or jams and things. The flowers are great for tea, and so again, more drink type things. Underneath them we can have some echinacea, it's going to come back year after year and produce beautiful flowers that are also medicinal tea. And that's what a lot of this was kind of. It actually really wasn't planned around drinks, but a lot of it ended up becoming things that will form, that are beautiful flowers that'll be good for drinks. And so then we've gone through the selection. A lot of the fruit trees are just selected by what will grow in this area. So apples, pears, plums, elderberry, pawpaw. I'm ruling out some of them in my brain that aren't appropriate for the site. And my brain is about to shut off, I think. And I'm also almost at my 20 minutes. So
So I was selected most of those based off of what works here. Same thing with the bushes. These two trees I selected as nut trees because there are some of the only things that produce those nice big canopies. I ruled out oak trees. They do produce an edible nut, but they're not an easily accessible nut to eat, meaning this is because they produce tannins. They're really, really bitter unless you boil them for a while first. So I ruled those out. Then we got black walnuts. They love to grow in this town, and I love to eat them, but they're really hard to crack. You need like an $80 nut cracker to get into those. And I have one, but not everyone does because not everyone is eating enough of them. So I thought of two different options. One is chestnuts, which is a nice starch, which we don't have otherwise in here. We've got greens, we've got some like different sugars and fibers. We've got healthy fats down here. We don't really have starches. So that's one option. But another option that I think is a little more accessible to people for an enjoyment and knowing how to eat it is heart nuts. So they are a member of the walnut family. We have lots of walnuts growing in town, so that's a familiar thing. But this is kind of half of a walnut, and it's heart-shaped, and it's much easier to crack because the whole thing comes out in one piece. So it's very accessible, and it's a protein source, it's a fat source, it's going to be a source of different nutrients that people can't get elsewhere, but it's also going to be a source of a nice big shade canopy. So that's how I came up with a lot of what's in there. And so this design has 2 nut trees, 24 fruit trees, 18 hazelnuts, 13 pawpaws, 50 grapevines, 20 kiwi vines, at least 150 fruit bushes, 6 social areas, and hundreds of herbs and flowers and perennial greens and things like that. So that's a little bit of the thought processes that went into it. There's a lot more kind of background stuff that goes in, but it was hard enough to keep this close to 20 minutes. So I hope you guys enjoyed, and if you're from Prescott, reach out to town council, talk to them, let them know, is this something that you want? Or if you want to see some things changed, let me know. If there's something you don't like, then maybe think about it for a moment and be like, well, I don't like this, but why don't you like it? Is it because you want something else? For example, maybe you don't like this gazebo. Well, why don't you like it? Is it you don't like it because the path is going through it? Well, why don't you like that? Because there's not as much room to sit in it. Okay, well, we want it to still be accessible, so then you could suggest moving it down a little bit and having the path run on that side of it. Or you could suggest maybe we make it just a little bit bigger so the path can still go under it or still go through it, and you can have a little bit more seating area in it, and it could actually extend up this way so the path goes down the middle and there's room for benches on both sides. So think about why you don't like things and then make suggestions. And I suggest the same thing if you're going to town council and saying, hey, don't build houses here. Let them know why. What would you prefer to see there? Because that's a whole lot more useful to them than just a whole bunch of people saying, no, not in my backyard. We don't like it. Why don't you like it? In my case, it's because that needs being met elsewhere. And I can see a much better thing that's going to meet the needs of various age groups, various socioeconomic groups, and just has a lot more potential to draw people to this area. So, hope you enjoyed it. I'm going to get these edited and get them posted up hopefully tonight. You won't know which day it is, so posting it right now.